Did you know that while 80% of wines in the US are purchased by women, only 15% of wines around the globe are made by women winemakers? Hi, friends. My name is Sarah, and I'm a certified sommelier and host of the Wine CEO podcast show. And this week, we are celebrating International Women's Day. So I thought it would be fun to celebrate women on the Wine CEO podcast show this week. And so I'm so excited to bring to you an interview with Marilee Bramhall. Marilee is an amazing sommelier, and she has started a company called Iola Wines. And this is a company that is dedicated to showcasing talented women winemakers from around the world. Right now, she is focused specifically in highlighting women winemakers in France and Italy, with hopes to expand that to many other regions around the world. It was an awesome conversation. We talked about some challenges for women in the wine industry, some biases that have made it difficult for female winemakers. We also speak about the stories of some incredible female winemakers that truly trailblazed and set incredible opportunities up for future women in the wine industry. It's a fun conversation and one I hope you'll enjoy as we are celebrating International Women's Day this week. So let's go ahead and dive into my conversation with Marilee. Well, Wine CEO podcast listeners, I am so excited for International Women's Day. I have a very special guest this week. I have Marilee Bramhall, and I've been really excited to chat with Marilee. She is doing some incredible work when we talk about female winemakers in the industry, and her company, Iola, is doing some awesome work to bring these female winemakers to consumers all around the globe. So I've been so looking forward to this conversation. Marilee, welcome to the Wine CEO podcast.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It is really great to be here. It's an honor to be here for Women's History Day. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Maybe you can start off and just give us a bit of your background. Talk to the listeners about how you got into the wine industry and what led you to this passion and mission that you have today.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, I would love to do that. It's a fun conversation to have. We all have a, kind of a circuitous journey in life, I guess. And I mean, for me, wine showed up in my life really, really early. I was probably, I think, like 11 years old. My dad has been an enthusiast forever. And this particular day in the summer, he grilled some T-bone steaks, and he was pouring up his favorite Left Bank Bordeaux. Or a favorite Left Bank Bordeaux that he particularly enjoyed. And for whatever reason, he decided I could have just a teeny, teeny, tiny taste. I mean, it was very small, like one finger taste. And that was my first exposure to wine. Of course, I did not have a massive reaction to the flavor. It was more about what it meant to me. I know it was from France, somewhere far away, somewhere I wanted to go, that it was special and that it was for sharing, that it was for great food. So it had a lot of meaning attached to it for me at that early age. And then eventually I did go to school in France for a while. And that was when the very first time I studied wine. But it was so cursory. I mean, it was just for a school project. And I happened to meet a caviste in the town where I was living. And then, so I interviewed her, and it was a woman. And then when I came home from France, I actually went to work for a large wine company here in Washington State. And I worked for them for a long time. I was in the wine business for just under a decade, but I came in on the corporate side. So my job was as a recruiter. So I worked recruiting enologists and winemakers and assistant winemakers and cellar masters and people working in the cellar, all kinds of, the side of the business that had to do with winemaking. I spent a lot of time doing that and leadership development for them. So I always say that I learned a lot through osmosis. And, that was just the starting point, really, though. Eventually getting to the point of studying wine was, it's a completely different thing than what I was doing. So that's how I got into wine. Yeah, was on the corporate side. And it's been quite a while ago that happened. And then it was 2008 when I just got really excited about the old world. Just knowing that, wow, I had the great good fortune to spend time working in Napa and in Washington State and taste some wonderful domestic wines. And as great as some of those Napa cabs are, that's not where Cabernet Sauvignon is originally from. So I wanted to go to the source, and that was really when my curiosity about the old world started, was 2008. Yeah.
Amazing. And I know one of your main passions, especially at Iola, is really featuring female winemakers. And it's
Hmm.
interesting. I was reading some of the statistics that you shared before we hopped on, and
Hmm.
although up to 80% of wine purchased in the US is typically made by women, only 15% of the winemakers worldwide are women, which is just astounding when you think about it.
Yeah.
So I know that one of
Yeah.
your main areas of focus is really to champion these women winemakers, right? These women vignerons, and specifically in France and Italy, and really help
Hmm.
share their wines. So, what drove you maybe on this path to maybe get excited specifically about women winemakers? You mentioned the old world just a
Hmm.
moment ago. So, talk to us kind of about Iola and where that passion project really began.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, it is, first of all, to pop back to the stats, it is crazy to think about, globally, only 15% of winemakers are women. And I mean, we're at that point, we're not even talking about women making 15% of the wine. That isn't, I mean, if we were looking at how much wine women actually make, I'm sure it would be considerably less than 15%. And then here in the US, if we have up to 80, some say 85% of wine purchases made by women, as women, we have a kind of an exciting opportunity to elevate women in the world of wine, and it clearly needs to happen. It's 2024, and we really need to see a lot more women, involved in this business. So for Iola, actually, interestingly enough, it wasn't an online wine e-commerce business until really, I mean, I started messing around with that during the pandemic. Prior to that, I was importing and selling wholesale. And I mean, I started the importing business in 2017. And from the beginning, it's always been about women, and it's always been about organic and sustainable wines. It's been interesting to see over the years how important um, conscientious and responsible viticulture is to women. A lot of times I found stories about when the conversion to organic farming happened, it was oftentimes because of a woman. Generally what happens is they either have had a family member who is ill, or maybe they have children that are playing in the vines, and they're thinking, I don't want my children around these chemicals. So that's oftentimes how I've seen that conversion to organic farming happen. And for me, I guess I had a lot of wonderful experiences traveling around wine country in, let's just say France, for instance. And it's so common that everywhere you go, you'll see père et fils, father and son, on vineyard and estate names. And I just got to wondering, where is the mère et fille? Where is the mother and daughter? How come we don't see that? And there's a lot of historical reasons for that. Um, but I just started, feeling like, wow, I know there's some out there. And then I remember a time I was in the Southern Rhone. I was in Baccarat one day, and I was tasting some wine, and the gentleman that was helping me was talking about a particular producer, and he said, "Oh, and this one's made by a woman." And it really struck me that that was something. The way that he was explaining this to me was conveying that that was something very unusual. And he talked about women having a different sensibility and their wines being different. I think that's a fascinating topic. I mean, we could have a lot of fun debate about that, and there's a lot of great perspectives on that topic. But yeah, I mean, it was really like, in Italy you see a lot of fratelli, the brothers, but where the mothers and daughters and sisters, is what I started, really wondering. And that was kind of, I got on this quest in 2017, and then if you look at what was happening here in the US in 2017 from a political perspective, it was a tough time for women. It's been kind of a tough time for women the last, during really the entire time that I've been, since I started importing in 2017, things have changed a lot for women here. So um, for me, wine is what I do. So that was my opportunity to try to do what I can to champion women and help women understand that we have a great opportunity to sort of influence and change what the dynamic is today. So for me, that's in wine. Like I said, that's what I can do. So that's what I'm doing. I'm trying, anyways. I'm doing the best I can.
I think that's amazing. And I couldn't agree more. We're aligned so much in this area of passion because it's something that I've seen a huge gap as well in the industry. And the first place I was exposed to it was really when I was studying for my certified sommelier exam. And the sommeliers were talking about how biologically women actually have better ability to taste wine and decipher flavors and aromas, just biologically more so than men. And yet, the number of male sommeliers far exceeds the number of women in the industry. And so it was shocking to me in that moment that, there's such a disparity in the difference between the men and women that are in the industry, even though women tend to be maybe a little more inclined just naturally to be better at it. But an interesting statistic. And when I was traveling this summer through France, I was really surprised, similar to maybe that comment that you experienced about how uncommon it was for a woman to either be a winemaker or to be the head of a house in various regions around France, because it's still considered so unique. It's not necessarily something that's
Mhm.
always accepted culturally, based on just family and traditions. And so it can be challenging for many women who are even born into a large wine family to still be respected and seen as able to take over the business or be in charge of the winemaking. So I think you're right. I think it's something that we have to continue championing and helping promote women and educate this as a topic in the industry, because it's still a big one where there's a lot of room for work to be done. Definitely.
Mhm. Yeah, I could not agree more. I mean, there's just so much opportunity, and you're right. I mean, there's a lot of data out there about women being having just a natural propensity to being excellent tasters and more sensitivity that way. But yet, if you look around, all around the wine business, I mean, like you said, certified sommeliers, and we're talking about wine growers. It's these days it's still just too much of an exception for a woman to be in that role. And I mean, I usually say that when it's no longer an exception, when it's no longer unique, when it's no longer something that is a differentiator, in terms of, like, for example, my business. I mean, I've looked and looked and looked. I haven't found anybody else in the US that's importing only wines made by women. I don't work with any men. No problem with others, but our focus is women. So, and I just haven't found anyone else willing to do that. And I think it's because it's just really hard. It's really, really difficult because there just aren't that many. So, and for me, Iola Wines it's absolutely about women, but above all, and first and foremost, it's about exceptional wine. It's about wine that is vibrant and expressive and exciting and living. Um, that's sort of my first bar. We gotta pass that, clear that hurdle first, and then, and then getting into the story about the woman behind it and sort of what brought her there, and the challenges she faces. And yeah.
I love that. And I love that you share the stories of the winemakers too, because that's so important in showcasing their product, right? It's not just a wine, but really the story of how they
Yeah.
became a winemaker and what they pour into that bottle. So, Marilee, I'm curious because I've noticed as a sommelier who hosts wine tastings that men and women, as I mentioned a moment ago, they taste differently just biologically. But have you noticed in your experience maybe how men and women taste wine differently, or in any tasting scenarios how you feel like the dynamics can be different, whether it's a mixed group or it's just a group of women, maybe?
hmm Oh, Sarah, I love this topic because it's crazy what I've witnessed. When I see, generally, like, if I'm going to just generalize and boil it down so it's not a overly long discussion, what I notice is that when a lot of times when you have consumers together, let's call them enthusiasts, people that aren't part of the trade, they're tasting together, men and women. Usually, what happens is women seem to kind of shut down. They lose their confidence. They don't want to say what they think they're smelling or tasting or experiencing. um and then when I'm in the opposite situation where there aren't any men present, it's completely different. It is, the pendulum swings completely, and women, it becomes collaborative. They're talking to each other about what they're experiencing, tasting, smelling, you know and they'll go. I mean, they don't have anything holding them back. Let's put it that way. They're willing to just go for it and engage on a completely different level. One of the other things I've noticed when I've done champagne master classes where it's men and women, I usually ask if, because we're usually tasting 8 or 10 different champagnes. I will ask if anyone wants to open a bottle of champagne, and I will teach them how to do it, properly, correctly, how we're taught in the trade to correctly open a bottle of sparkling wine. And most of the time what happens is it's only men that volunteer or ask if they can do that. And then usually what happens is as the evening progresses, there might be one woman who says, would it be possible for me to try that? And they're so timid. Whereas if you do that in a different situation where it's just women, they're like, well, I'd like to learn. I never, generally what happens with sparkling wine is men take the bottle, or men are always the ones that are asked to open the bottle. It's that way with still wine too. There's just this perspective that if a bottle of wine is going to be open, it's going to be done by a man, not by a woman. And that's just another one of the things that I'm, looking to do with trying to democratize wine, is make women feel like they absolutely belong in that position just as much as a man does. They can open a bottle of champagne or sparkling wine anytime they want to. They can open, still wine anytime they want to. They can open a bottle of still wine with a wax seal around it. I mean, there's the things that feel daunting and intimidating to women. If we put them in the situation where they're just with another group of women, we're able to, really empower them. That's what it comes down to. Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit earlier how there's maybe been a trend that you've noticed where a lot of winemakers that are female have a focus around organic or even maybe low intervention, natural wines. I know that's definitely one area that can differentiate some female winemakers from maybe male counterparts in their region, but it's just one. When you think about in general what you've noticed as being a difference between maybe female winemakers or wine growers and then male, what are some other things that typically stand out for you that make you really excited to champion these female winemakers?
Oh, goodness sakes, I could go on and on about this. Part of it is that they're in a world where it's difficult for them, but yet they persevere. So that's something that, I guess I'm someone that loves to root for the underdog. And and I mean, we talked about the stats earlier. Women are definitely the underdog in this situation. So so there's that. There's this element of perseverance. There's the commitment to quality. There is the willingness to go somewhere completely different than where things have been in their family for a while. In terms of, whether that's an organic conversion or making a decision to move into low intervention wines and go to, indigenous yeast fermentations and, no additives except for, minimal sulfites. Those are some of the things that I value. And I don't want to say that, that it's only women that have this focus. And certainly I'm sure that there are plenty of women that don't have that sort of focus. But the small producers that I work with, and that's another thing about Iola, is we're focused on, women wine growers that are, their holdings are generally pretty small. Their annual production is generally pretty small. I mean, I think our smallest is something like 8,000 bottles a year, which is tiny, and then we go up to about 100,000 bottles a year, which some people, like I know I have run into a lot of people that will hear, me give some stats like that number of bottles per year, and they hear like, oh, 30,000 bottles, 30,000. There's a producer I work with in Champagne, and she has a tiny little plot of vines, and it's only about 3.5 hectares. And as a result, it's about 30,000-ish bottles of champagne per year. And when I say that to folks in master classes, they often think, that's a lot. That's a lot of wine. So then I usually ask them, well, do you have a guess about how many bottles of Veuve Clicquot are made every year? And, we go around and there's some guessing. It's usually pretty fun. People are like, well, I don't know, it must be a lot. Is it a million? Could it be that much? And then I tell them, well, it's between 19 and 20 million bottles a year. And they're like, wow, okay, 30,000 all of a sudden does not seem like that much at all.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So it's, women that are committed to delivering something in the bottle that is remarkable. And they're doing it under difficult circumstances in a world that's, I've had producers tell me stories about, taking their tractors in to be repaired, and the repair guy won't talk to them because they're a woman. And this is not that. This is within the last decade. This stuff's happening.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. It's there's a list of stories like that that I've heard, and things like. A producer I work with in Champaign, one of the stories she told me was, when she started out as a woman heading up her family house and a woman wine grower, if a woman made a mistake, they were never forgiven and it was never forgotten. If a man made a mistake, it was, oh well, just move on. That happens. Mistakes happen. And she said, it's starting to get better, but it's still significantly difficult for women. So I guess I just feel like they're what they're doing and what they're committed to and what they're delivering is under difficult circumstances. And you never know what else is going on in their life as well. A lot of times they have young kids, or maybe they have aging parents. There's other complications that are going on, yet they still somehow find a way to do what they're doing in a really exceptional way. And then a lot of times they're doing other things on the side. Another example, a producer in Champaign that I work with, she actually, she was adopted as a child. She was born in Haiti and she was adopted by her family in France. And growing up, what she wanted to do was she wanted to be an aid worker. And after her university experience, she had a really hard time finding a position because she didn't have experience. And she got kind of caught up in that vicious cycle of, no experience, I can't get the job. And then how do I get experience because I can't get a job? And right around the same time, her brother decided to go do his own thing in Champaign and not work with her dad. And so her dad asked her, is there any chance you would consider coming back and working with me? I just want you to take it over and I want it to become yours eventually. And so she decided to do that. So she's got 2 young kids under the age of 5. She's been back at the family Champaign house since 2016 or 2015. And so she's doing that full time. Yet she still found time to start an aid organization with some friends in Champaign. And so she's doing things, building schools in Haiti, creating opportunities for girls in Haiti, besides everything else. So when I hear stories like that, I always feel like, wow, I could probably be doing more than what I'm doing. They just inspire me all the time. Yeah.
Incredible. And inspiring was the word that I was just about to use, because truly when you hear a story like that, it does inspire you to want to do so much more, right? And you just think about the things that we spend our time on, and you're like, okay, let me cut this out because I could, do so much, like this incredible woman. And it makes me want to buy her wine immediately too, because I'm like, I want to support this amazing mom and, winemaker. What an incredible story. And you've mentioned 2 wonderful women in Champaign, and not surprising because I know there's actually a very special history in the Champaign region, specifically around women. And I know this is something that you love to share. So would you mind sharing a little bit about the fun history of women in Champaign?
It's an amazing topic, isn't it, Sarah? It's so much fun to talk about women in Champaign. My personal theory, and so far I haven't found anyone that disagrees with me, is that Champaign, the region and the wine, is what it is today, largely because of the innovation and the resilience of women. Honestly, if we look back to, Veuve Clicquot, very well-known brand across the world. Everybody knows this champagne, and everyone thinks of it as special and high quality. And if you have a special moment, that would certainly be fitting. And behind all of that is a wonderful story. A lot of people don't know that in French, the word veuve means widow, and that immediately implies a woman is involved. And her story is incredible. Barbe Nicole Ponsardin Clicquot is her name. And in, basically the turn of the 19th century, in the early 1800s, she married, and her husband sadly died very young. And he was someone who, I don't know that this was completely unusual, but it seems like it probably was at that time. He talked to her a lot about his vision and his ideas and what he wanted to see happen. And then he got sick and died. And so she was a widow. And because of the fact that she was a widow, she was not included in the Napoleonic Code laws that did not allow women to have a business, have a bank account, any of that without the express permission of a husband or father. So because she was a widow, she wasn't restricted by that law, and she decided to take over the champagne business. And she actually, she knew that they needed some capital in order to get where they were intending to go. And so she came to her father-in-law, who was a successful textile. I don't want to use the word merchant because he was far beyond that, but he was let's just say he was a textile baron. How about that? Very successful individual at that time. And she asked him for a loan, and he said yes. And this was a sizable loan. I mean, I've heard and read things like it's somewhere around 800 in today's currency would be somewhere around 800,000 euros, which, that's a lot of money to ask a loan for a woman in the early 1800s for her fledgling champagne business. And what that tells me is that her father-in-law was paying attention since he met her about how smart she was and how intelligent she was. She went and got educated after her husband died. So she learned about the business, and she also learned about the vines and champagne making. It was so important to her. So she was really a trailblazer for women in terms of actually being a woman in business. She took some big risks, like running blockades to get her champagne into Russia ahead of Moet. I think his name was Jean-Remy Moet, was her big rival in champagne. And this was, of course, before Moet was Moet Chandon. And she actually managed to get her champagne into Russia before he did. And that allowed her to really kind of become sort of an overnight sensation in that era. And then, at that point, she's looking at needing capital to grow. And one of the things I love about her is that she loved being in her vines. Her being in her vines was so important. I think she spent a lot of time around Bouzy. That's where they had a lot of vines. Of course, she lived in France. And then interestingly, she built around 1840, she built just a beautiful, castle is the only word for it, in Bordeaux in the Vallée de la Marne. And coincidentally, all these years later, one of the champagne producers I work with, the one that I just said makes 30,000 bottles a year, that's her property now. So she has a walled vineyard that surrounds the castle. And so the castle's been in her family since the late 1920s, which that's another story about how it ended up there. But a fascinating connection to the Veuve Clicquot. And then the other thing I love about the Veuve Clicquot, she invented riddling, which that's the way that that they move the spent yeast in the champagne bottle down to the neck of the bottle. And she had an idea about how to do it, which involved taking her kitchen table down to the cellar and drilling holes in it and putting the bottles in. And she got a lot of pushback. And I have a feeling that she got a lot of pushback, all the time. And she didn't let it stop her, which, when I think about what must that have been like in that era, it's pretty amazing. So, I mean, she's an amazing one. And then there's many other widows, there's some real famous ones. And then there's a lot of others that most people don't know about. I mean, Louise Pommery is another one that's very famous, and her story is fascinating. I mean, she was educated in England, and so she had a sense for what the English taste was. And so she was the first, the English, in that era, in the Veuve Clicquot's era, the champagne was very, very, very sweet, like as sweet as the sweet wines that come from Sauternes. I think what is it like? It was something like 300 grams per liter of sugar. I don't know. You'll have to check my facts on that one, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. The British, so when Louise Pommery came around, and I think her her timing was just around the time of Clicquot passed away. But Louise Pommery had because she'd been educated in England, had a sense for what their taste profile was. And it wasn't for that sweet champagne. They wanted something dry and fresh. And so she was the first one she really invented Brut, and making that, champagne in a much drier, crisper, lighter way than what the very sweet champagnes had been prior to her time. And I mean, there's the funny story about how it became known as Brut. I'm sure you know this story too. People in France, when they first tasted it, it was so dry. It was just, searing dry for them, searingly dry. And so they called it brutal. It was just brutally dry. And there's stories that's how the word Brut, that's where the word Brut came from, to describe dry champagne. So, I mean, that was something that she did. I think she's also responsible for coming up with the idea of submerging the neck of the bottle in the brine solution to freeze the spent yeast in the neck of the bottle after the riddling process is complete. And then, I mean, look at Lily Boulanger. She's another widow. I mean, her husband died in 1941 and she took over. So it's interesting to look at this chain of widows. And then, even in 1941, there still was no provision for women in France to have their own bank account or run a business or own a business unless they were widows without the express permission of a father or brother. I mean, that didn't change until I think it was 1965, which is pretty shocking. I mean, that's within 60 years. That's, within the lifetime of a current generation. So it's, I don't know. I know that was a regulation here in the US too, and I just don't know when women were actually able to get their own bank accounts without permission from a father or a brother or a husband. I have to look that up. But so there's, I mean, and then fast forward, there's just more widows to talk about. The list goes on. Carole Duval Leroy is another one who's done all kinds of. I think she was widowed around 1991, and she was the first organic certified producer in Champagne, I believe. So women, they just keep trailblazing in Champagne. And so there's certainly these big names from the Grand Marques. And as much as I love and appreciate the Grand Marques, I just have a huge spot in my heart for the women that are growing the grapes in Champagne and then actually elaborating their own champagnes from the grapes that they grow. So I only work with grower producers in Champagne. And I think that when people visit Champagne, it's of course wonderful to go to the big houses and, to learn about the big houses and taste those champagnes. But there's also, you only get half the story if you do that. I think it's really important to see the grower producers as well. And if people want to travel, I can give you the name of someone in Champagne who is brilliant at doing wonderful excursions for people in Champagne.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I'll get that name from you so we can add some info on the show notes so that folks can check that out. Because I visited Champagne last summer and I completely agree with you. I mean, it's such a special region. And I can agree that these matriarchs of Champagne, we'll call them, have inspired so many women since then to do incredible things in that region, as well as in wine in general. But it's an incredible region steeped in so much history. I mean, history around the world wars. And while men were off fighting, the things the women were doing to keep the wineries running, right, or to hide wines from impeding enemies. I mean, really incredible stories. So it's an amazing region with a lot of really incredible history. But also to your point, while it's wonderful to check out these large houses and the great wines they're making, I agree that I think being able to experience the grower producer champagnes who are giving you this amazing identity of place and terroir, and you get to experience these champagnes that really speak to the vineyard or the region where they're from, is something very special. So I think seeking out some of those wonderful grower producers, especially some great female ones, is something that you cannot miss as a wine consumer. So I'm excited that you have some great connections with some wonderful women in the region. That's great.
Sarah, I have to say that I just love that you talked specifically about wines of place and, wines that are about speaking to the terroir. That's because that's exactly what these are. These wines are, each one is special and really is representative of the terroir where it comes from. So yeah, wine, I mean, and of course, above all, wine is about a sense of place, whether it's, Champagne or Mount Etna or California, that's what it's about, is to tell the story of the place. So thanks for saying that. Yeah,
Yeah.
especially about champagne growers.
Yes, it's a big passion of mine. You've mentioned your website once or twice, and I know that you have a wine subscription that folks can sign up for if they're interested in being able to get amazing wines made by female vignerons and winemakers and wine growers. So tell us a bit about what Iola has to offer as far as wine subscription and any way that we can get involved and kind of follow along in this amazing journey.
Yeah, okay. There's a bunch of stuff going on, Sarah. It's really exciting. I think 2024 is going to be just a big year for Iola. So, like I said, we're working on this project to expand our ability to ship. So soon we'll be shipping to almost every state in the U.S., which means that we'll be able to reach people all over that are interested in wines made by women. In terms of our wine clubs, we have a few. We have our Connoisseur Club, which is our most popular, and that's because it's a little bit of everything. It's a little red wine, a little white wine, and then I love rosé and sparkling wine. So there's always, those crop up at different times during the year. We do a club specifically for red wine lovers. We actually now have a club for white wine, people that prefer white wine. I just ended up getting requests for that, which really surprised me. So last year we started a club for just white wine. They do every once in a while. I give them a rosé because I feel like they should, experiment a little bit. And then the other one that's really popular is our sparkling wine club. And last year, I love sparkling wine. I'm a big fan of sparkling wine, of course, champagne. And then there's some Cremants around France that are just lovely. And then, of course, in Italy, there's some wonderful Metodo Classico producers kind of all over the place. You find producers from time to time that are doing Metodo Classico for their particular region. One that I love is Oltrepo Pavese in Lombardia in Italy. The Metodo Classico there is just extraordinary, and it's I have just an absolutely wonderful producer I work with there. Now, what's happened with our sparkling club is that because I've met so many just extraordinary women in Champagne, it's really shifted over to being a club devoted to Champagne. The other sparkling wines that I love show up in the Connoisseur Club and also in the white wine club. Yeah. And I will say this year I did, I sort of pulled a fast one on our Club Rouge folks at during November, our November allocation, which and I guess I should say our allocations for Connoisseur and our Club Rouge are 4 times a year, and it's just 6 bottles 4 times a year, so it's pretty manageable in terms of quantity. And then the other ones are even smaller. The White Wine Club is just 12 bottles a year, so just 3 times a year you get 4 bottles. And then Champagne is twice a year, 4 bottles twice a year. So that gives people the chance to try 8 different champagnes. I don't repeat them. So there's unique wines in each allocation. And then I spend a lot of time writing an insert that goes into each shipment. And it includes not only the information about the wine, the grape, the vintage, the region, of course, tasting note and food pairing, but I also include stories about the women behind the wine so that people know it's their chance to get to know the woman that made the wine. I mean, one of the producers in Piemonte that I work with, I love, one day we were together and she said something that's always stuck with me. And that is, when you make wine, your whole life is inside the bottle. And it's true. It really is true for these women. And that's how they think about their wine. They're pouring their life inside the bottle. So having some information about each woman and what, a little bit of her story is a fun part of the insert as well. Yeah, so everyone gets an insert, and then they get some benefits for being a club member too. So we do some cool shipping benefits and some members only wines, and we're going to start offering some members only master classes this year. I've been doing private master classes for a while, but I'd like to expand that to do some things especially for members. Yeah, and we do some members only events, which are a lot of fun too. Yeah.
Very cool. So lots of exciting things for members and folks that are following along. And I'm guessing Instagram, social media would be great ways to be able to kind of follow along on the exciting things as they're released in the coming
Yeah.
months.
Yeah, absolutely. Instagram, it's easy to find me at iola.wines. And one of the things I'm doing with Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn is a weekly live stream. And during the live stream, it's either a lot of times it's with a wonderful wine colleague that I just adore working with. She's on the East Coast of the US and she's a wine writer and a judge. And so we meet up and taste a wine together. And we spend some time, of course, talking about the region and the producer. And there's a nice educational component to it, yet we don't make it boring and dry and overly serious. I mean, I feel like one of the things that I'm on a mission to do is democratize wine so that people, so that it's everyone feels welcome. I feel like if you're curious, that's the only requirement. If you're curious about it and you want to know more, then you're welcome. You're welcome here, and you belong with Iola Wines for sure. So I'm doing those weekly lives, and a lot of times I'm also doing them with producers. So when I have producers that speak English, I've been doing those as well. So those weekly lives will continue, but on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And then another way to stay up to speed on what's happening is to sign up for our newsletter. We don't send out loads and loads of email because I know we all have way too much email these days. But it is a great way to keep up with, what's going on, new producers, new states being added, wine travel. It's another thing I do is lead wine and food tours. And right now, actually, I have one coming up in Provence in June 1st through 8th this year, 2024. I'll be in Provence for a week. And we have some wonderful wine experiences lined up for that and they're all producers that I work with. So yeah, it's the newsletter, Instagram, and then just checking out the website every once in a while is a good way to stay up to speed on what's happening.
Very cool. Well, I will include all of those things in the show notes for today's episode. Lots of great ways for folks to follow along and get involved and maybe travel with you to Provence and do some really exciting things when it comes to the world of female winemakers. So this has been such a fun way to celebrate International Women's Day. Thank you so much for coming on and just sharing your heart and passion around women winemakers that are doing some really incredible things, and also just the ability to talk a bit more about what's happening in the industry and what we can do to better support women winemakers and make sure that we're really opening up the door for more generations of women to get excited about being in this industry and really trailblazing to do some exciting things. So, Marilee, thank you so much.
It has been so much fun and such a pleasure, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me on and letting me be a part of your celebration of International Women's Day. It's an honor. I'm really grateful.
Oh, thank you so much.
All right, friends, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Marilee. If you learned something new or loved today's episode, don't forget to like and share it with a friend. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so now. I have lots of amazing wine content on there, but I'll be featuring some more fun things for International Women's Day this week on the podcast show. If you want to be able to support some female winemakers, check out today's show notes. Head over to Iola Wine's website so that you can learn about joining Marilee's wine club and see about some of the amazing female winemakers she's supporting. Until next episode, friends, I hope you drink something new and delicious, and I will catch you all in the next show of the Wine CEO podcast.